Hi, it's Dorothy Guining with Scrapbooking Quebec. Today I'm participating in Kiki Halbert's monthly YouTube collaboration, Scrapbooking From The Heart. We create layouts inspired by one-word prompts that encourage you to look at your stories in more depth. June's prompt is grow. So here's the layout I'm going to be creating, and my story is going to be about a garden, so obviously it's about growth. However, I'm going to push it further. This is also a story about a learning process, which is another form of growth. And throughout this process, I'm going to share ideas on how to scrapbook growth in its basic form. But at the end, I'm going to talk about documenting growth as a learning process. And this naturally pushes you toward documenting a bigger story. When you're thinking about your own stories, keep in mind growth in its basic form can be about plants, pets, people. There are many, many possibilities. And the same thing goes for a learning process because we learn and grow every day. Before jumping in, I do want to point out there are links to all the other participants in the description box below, so be sure to check out what they're up to this month. Here's what I'm going to be using, and most of it is from Simple Stories. That botanical print is from the Vintage Cottage Gardens collection, and that wood grain is from the Color Vibe. And I find all of this creates kind of an earthy feel, perfect for garden photos. So here's what's on my desk, and I'm showing you 3 photos that I matted in advance, and it shows the progression of my husband's hot pepper garden this year in 2021. So I'm showing you the papers that I've selected for it, and I do plan to use both sides of that wood grain because one side is lined paper. And I also have some scraps of paper here because you're going to see I do some paper piecing later on, and I did do some die cutting as well. And those are the alphas I selected. Those are from Simple Stories as well. Now I'm going to show you how I created a few embellishments in advance. So I have those flower pots there that I stamped and die cut. I have those leaves there as well as that grass. Now the flower pots came from a die and stamp set from Stampin UP called Grown with Love. Also, the leaves there, those are from a die set called Forever Flourishing dies, and that grass there I punched out with the Creative Memories Border Maker cartridge. You can use store-bought embellishments, obviously. I happen to love using my tools, so that's why I dug them out. So I'm showing you that purple paper there, that mauve paper, that's going to be completely covered up. And what you see me doing right now is cutting down a bunch of strips of paper to create a really easy foundation page. And I will put measurements for everything I'm doing on the screen when I adhere it to the page. But right now, I'm just going to show you how I'm going to set it up. And the reason why I have that mauve cardstock underneath there is because I didn't want to use all the wood grain paper because I wanted to use the flip side of it for my journaling box. So I showed you essentially how I plan to set up my page, but the first thing I'm going to do is take that strip of paper that I'm going to use as my journaling box, and I'm using an old die from Stampin UP, a file tab, to create a file tab at the top. Because this is a story, like I said, it's about documenting growth in its basic form, this year's plants, but it's also going to be about learning. Like I said, I'll talk about that later on when I do the journaling. But you can see there I have that file tab. Now, if you don't have a file tab, you can easily create one. I'm showing you one way I like to do it. I have a few label punches there, and if you do have label punches, all you have to do is take one of the punched out pieces, cut it in half, and layer it up behind your paper, and it creates a great tab. Now I'm trimming this down, but the measurements I put on the screen, it's actually going to be shorter because you're going to see at the very end when I do my journaling, I actually adjust that journaling box. So the measurements on the screen are for the final page only. When I do this on YouTube, like when I create on a day-to-day basis, I just have to adjust as I go along and create the page. So you can see I'm adhering everything to the page, and it's a very, very easy page setup, a very classic page setup. Just a nice big border over on the left-hand side and a strip of photos. And by the way, a strip of photos is a great way to document growth. You can see the progression of growth right there. Now what I'm going to do is some paper piecing. So I'm starting with a piece of wood grain card paper, actually, that measures 3.5 inches wide, simply because that's the size I decided upon. And I'm cutting down some really narrow strips of paper here, and I'm doing it with scissors. You do not need any special tools to create this fence. Actually, the wonkier the better. So I'm slicing them down, I'm trimming them a bit. I put them all on top of one another and created a picket at the top by cutting out a point. Now what you see me doing is cutting out some even more narrow strips that I plan to lay across the fence, and I'm just adjusting everything. I'm making them a little bit more narrow. I want my fence to land right on top of that border. Now you see me getting out this ink by VersaFine ink. It's the color Misty Moonlight or something like that. Anyway, it's a dark gray ink. All I'm doing is making my fence pickets look weathered. So I'm adding a bit of ink here, and then you're going to see how I place it on the page to create a fence. This is a really fun embellishment that takes no special tools, only a pair of scissors and a bit of ink, and it's great for summertime photos as well as autumn photos. Think pumpkin patch, stuff like that, Halloween. Anyway, you can see how I'm creating my main embellishment cluster there. I have my fence there at the bottom of that border. I have that line of grass. Now I'm piling up my flower pots. Some of them are going to have leaves coming out of them. Another one's just going to be kind of tossed on the side. I'm actually giving my leaves a little bit of a haircut just so that they work a little bit. I'm going to put one of them over on the right-hand side of the word grow. I'm going to actually have it layered up underneath the word. Anyway, all I'm doing here is creating an embellishment cluster. Now, obviously, I made my own embellishments, but with this piece work fence that I showed you how to create, you can add stickers, floral embellishments, anything from your stash as well. That works really well with stickers, ephemera, as well as homemade embellishments like what I'm doing here today. I'm adhering all of this to the page, and you're going to see when I do put the flower pot, the second one over there in front of the fence, that second one does get popped up with some foam adhesive, and I actually layered an extra layer of cardstock underneath it because I do like to add extra cardstock underneath pieces that I pop up on foam adhesive just to give it a bit more body. That yellow adhesive you saw me use to adhere the leaves is called Sticky Specs from Ecstasy Crafts. It just adds a little bit of adhesive on detailed pieces. I'm showing you how I stamped out the date, or actually I stamped out a little line where I could write the date on top of it. And I'm going to put them on top of each one of those photos. That does get switched up a bit, but the dates are there, will be there anyway. I also added a repetition of that green. I added some leaves up there, kind of tucked underneath that middle photo, overlapping the top photo. I just wanted a repetition of that embellishment from the bottom left in the top right. And you can see I actually adhered those dates along the photos. Like I said, that will get switched up at the end, and I'll talk about that in a few moments. Now what I'm doing is simply stamping a word in that file tab, and it's from a stamp set called From the Garden, and I'm literally stamping From the Garden in there. So you can see for this project, I really did dig into my tools. Also for documenting a timeline growth, it's a great time to get out your roller date stamp. Anyway, here's the final page. So what I ended up doing was my journaling, of course, and I ended up adding a few staples. You can see I've stapled the date that I actually printed out again. You can kind of see I did my journaling there, and I did it on the computer. So what I did was for the tabs over there on the right, I ended up printing out the dates in the same font. I punched it out with a different punch. It's actually called a Washi tape punch, I think, from Stampin UP. And I stapled them to each one of the photos, or near each one of the photos. And I found that the silver staple really gave kind of a garden-y, earthy look about it as well. And you can also see I actually added staples on the fence as well, just to give a repeat of that silver. Now, before talking about my journaling, I do want to talk a little bit about the formatting first. You can see here that I have written out my journaling on the computer, and I like to do this when I have a lot of journaling for a few reasons. I avoid making mistakes, number one, because it seems the more I write, the more opportunity I have to mess up. Also, I can play with my wording before actually committing it to a page, and I can actually fit more of the story on the page. You can also see how I formatted it to fit my journaling box. First, I printed it and tested it in a size. I did it in a 14-point font, and it was too big. So then I reduced it to 13, and then I made a space to insert my title. Now, I did mine on vellum, which is something I often do, and then I placed it on top of my journaling box. So the journaling is done. So obviously I didn't need lined paper here, but whatever, I used it anyway. Now, before reading my story, I just want to talk about the learning process a bit, about journaling a learning process. If you record observations throughout a learning process, you're going to naturally get a bigger picture, a more informative, interesting story. So my story is about my husband's hot pepper garden. Now, I could have just recorded the facts about his plant growth in 2021 like his pictures show, but instead I decided to write about his learning process. So here it goes. This year was year 2 of Larry's COVID hot pepper gardening. Year 3 if you consider 2019, the first year he grew them. In 2020, he upped the game by almost exclusively growing peppers. He learned about the Scoville scale, ordered seeds online, planted on March 1st, and experimented with hot sauce recipes. He even turned Tara's old room into a greenhouse. This year, he applied what he had learned. He planted fewer varieties, but focused more on what everybody loved, the super hot 7-pot bubble gum. His sauce with this pepper was to die for, I'm told. I'm not into hot sauces, so I wouldn't know. Photo number 1. He planted 5 varieties on February 28, 2021, though the germinating started weeks earlier. He even planted seeds he had saved from last year's harvest. Photo number 2. His plants in the greenhouse on April 4th. Photo number 3. He built a shelf along the fence to hold his plants. So you can see here my story encompasses a lot more than just the growth of his garden this year. And actually this journaling required a little bit of research because it's about my husband's garden. So I was pummeling him with questions about it. So sometimes you might have to dig a bit further, but trust me, it's worth it. It's really interesting to have these kinds of stories in your albums from time to time. Anyway, that's it for today. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please give it a thumbs up. If you haven't subscribed to my channel, Scrapbooking Quebec, I would be absolutely honored and thrilled if you did. Don't forget to check out the other participants. Their links are in the description box below. Have a fantastic day, and I'll see you soon on YouTube. Bye-bye.